If you were around for the earlier days of gaming content on YouTube and still remember trailblazers like the Angry Video Game Nerd, this game is probably still buried in the pit of your mind.
This game is fucking horrible! It's fucking horrible!
At the time, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't seen as anything too exceptional. It even got a 6 out of 10 from the Germans. The NES has no shortage of subpar games, and it's only long after its release that it gained any kind of notoriety. Its infamy precedes it by now, but what actually made it so bad? Well, I only had a vague idea as well, and after playing it myself, I think I understand it enough to claim with confidence that it's one of the worst games of all time. You'll notice that I'm not playing the American version. That shouldn't seem like a big deal, but there's some notable differences between the Japanese and US releases. Namely, the American version removed 2 of the 6 levels and replaced them with clones of other levels.
Supposedly the Japanese version has more levels, while the US version replaced them with some of the same levels repeated. So I guess the Japanese version is better?
It is not. Oh, it is not. There are a couple things in this game that are only in those cut levels, and so removing them also removes certain parts of the design. I want you to witness the uncut, unadulterated experience of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Let me start with what's good about this game. Number 1, the music is composed by Michiharu Yasuda, who was a pretty talented musician. Yeah, this game, Rygar, listen to this. And now this. He couldn't even be bothered to write a new track for the title screen. This bit of self-plagiarism is actually the only way we know he worked on Jekyll and Hyde. In fact, he's the only person we know worked on it at all. There are no credits in the game, on the box, or in the manual, so before we even begin, we know that not a single person wanted this on their resume. For the NES era, that's saying something. Other than that, the music itself is actually pretty good in my opinion. It's tainted by its association to this game, but there is much worse from the time period. When you just sit down and listen to it, you can actually hear some of Yasuda's ability. Number 2, the graphics are fine. There's some nice color choices in Hyde's stages. That's it. For the rest of the game, there are not enough terrible things I could say. Jekyll and Hyde is fundamentally a side-scroller. The game itself does not give you an objective, but the fact that there's only one direction to move in means that as long as the player plays the game, they'll be moving towards the end. If you read the manual, you would know that you are Dr. Jekyll, who recently created a chemical potion that split his good and evil personalities into 2. During these daytime stages, Jekyll must progress through 6 levels to get to the church, and be married to his beloved Millicent. Along the way, he is attacked by the entire world at once. For some reason, everything is out to get you. You begin walking, and suddenly, the townspeople just start ramming into you at full speed, knocking you back. There is no indication of when they're going to do this. Sometimes you can pass by 5 of them and nothing. Then, in an instant, there's 2 gunning for you from both sides. This is the first massive hurdle that this game faces. Nothing is communicated to the player. You don't know when they're going to attack, when they're going to walk past you, when they're going to walk past you, turn around, and then run at you. There's this kid with a slingshot. Sometimes he comes from the left, sometimes the right. Sometimes he just runs past you. Sometimes he shoots a rock across the screen. There's no discernible pattern or logic to what he or any of the enemies do. This bomb guy, yeah, he just drops bombs in the middle of the street. Most of the time he'll do it when he's right in front of you. Sometimes he'll drop it from a distance. Sometimes the fuse is 5 seconds. Sometimes it's 1. The explosion radius of the bomb is huge and has no visual indicator, not helped by the fact that the direction you need to move in to avoid taking damage is different depending on what level you're on. Sometimes you dodge to the left, sometimes to the right, and sometimes, as the only guide on GameFAQs describes, you'll probably take damage no matter which direction you go. All of this is made so much worse by the way Jekyll handles. His walk is fast enough, but his jump is just awful. You rise slowly, hang in the air for a second, and then fall at the exact same speed. Oh, and I forgot to mention that there's like a half-second delay between when you hit the ground and when you can jump again. Every stage of the jump is so sluggish that you can't react reliably to hazards or plan where you're going to land with any precision. You can influence the direction a little bit, but it feels as dead set as the Castlevania jump, except that game is actually designed around it. Jekyll also has this cane jab attack with the B button. Yeah, that's about as much as there is to say about it. When all of these things combine, you will find yourself suddenly transforming into Mr. Hyde. So why does this happen? Look at the top of the screen. You've got a life bar, which is simple enough, and underneath it something called meter. It goes from H to J, and for some reason the end of the meter is a slant instead of just a line, which makes it harder to tell how many units full it is. When your meter runs out and drains to Hyde, you stress out and transform. So how does the meter drain? Well, as best I can figure out, different things will do more damage to either your health bar or the stress meter. The barrels, for instance, seem to deal more life, but the bees and spiders deal meter damage. This is all made less certain by the fact that you can be hit multiple times before it registers on either bar. So you turn into Hyde and, okay. Oh no. I have to kind of focus on... Oh! Whoa! Oh! Yep. And now that's a game over. What? What? Here's what's happening. Hyde is playing a different game. I suppose in an attempt to capture the themes of the book, Jekyll and Hyde play the same stages but in reverse, and Hyde's is a nightmare version. Just like Jekyll, you're immediately assaulted by a million enemies with no time to understand what's going on, or how these sections play, or what you're supposed to do. The goal is to keep Jekyll ahead of Hyde, which is why Hyde's levels are auto-scrollers, so you can't stall. When Hyde reaches the point that Jekyll transformed at, the lightning strikes you and you game over. The goal when you're Hyde is to fight enemies to lower your stress meter and turn back to Jekyll, where you'll be given a quarter of your health back. So Hyde actually has combat against these, monsters? Okay, so how does he do it? Oh, you want to talk about patterns. This is the Psycho Wave, the strangest attack I have ever seen in a video game. In a weird way, I don't hate it, because after enough practice I was able to land it with some consistency. I just have to wonder, why did they program it like this? Why does it move in a curve and then back up at you in a sine wave? For some reason you can only have one on screen at a time, and it tries to return to you. So when you send it out, you're making a commitment that this awkward projectile is actually going to hit something and disappear that way. Hyde also has a punch. Never use the punch. So killing enemies refills your meter, and these little brains on legs refill it the fastest. They are too low to the ground to hit with a punch, and the most reliable way to kill them is by waiting for them to hop in front of you and spamming them with a Psycho Wave. As for the other enemies, they all take multiple hits to kill, and because these levels are auto-scrollers, when you try to punch them, they will scroll into you and deal contact damage. I can think of weak means of attack in other games, but at least something like the pistol in Doom can be used as a last resort weapon. The punch is one half of your offensive options as Hyde, and it's completely useless. Hyde handles similarly to Jekyll. His jump is higher, but it's actually harder to control. Also, because you can't stop moving forward, whenever he runs into a ledge, he automatically jumps. This isn't too big of a problem until the last stage, but put a pin in that. I actually think that Hyde's levels are less painful than Jekyll's, just because you can actually interact with the game. Jekyll has no meaningful agency besides avoiding obstacles, which means that you just have to endure the game's constant stream of garbage. And by garbage, I mean... I touched on this earlier, but I have to make it clear. Nearly every single enemy or obstacle in this game has a random behavior. The townsfolk, the bombs, this opera singer, these people throwing stuff out of their windows, these barrels, oh god, these barrels. The barrels are first introduced in level 3, where they're a nuisance but not too annoying. It really hits the fan at level 6. The people in the windows are always throwing objects in opposite directions at downward arcs. The rate they throw the objects is seemingly random, and the spots they target have only a slight pattern. This is the only thing that makes them bearable. Now, level 6 adds the barrels into the equation. Normally this would be a good instance of combining two elements together to create a new challenge. Here, however, the barrels will both move at different speeds. It's often impossible to tell which one is traveling faster and by how much. Combined with the floaty, inaccurate jump and consistently dodging them is a nightmare. Now, if that wasn't enough, you have the people in the windows. So now the ground and the air, the only two heights you can occupy, are both swarming with hazards, and every time you get hit, you get sent flying back. The best way to deal with the object throwers is to inch your way forward, but that's impossible with the barrels. The only way to avoid the barrels is to jump over them, but you can't do that. Unless sometimes you can? If you just attempt it enough times, once or twice, everything will line up for you and you can pass. But then you get bodied by the bomb guys, who just keep spawning from the side, and avoiding the barrels can make it nigh impossible to avoid the blast. When I say this game is barely designed, I mean it. You see this dog? He's not here all the time. Only sometimes. A lot of parts of this game are randomized. Certain sections are set, but others are just whatever the game decides to put there. The only consistent way to pass by this section, which, mind you, is at the very beginning of level 6, is to get hit by the objects, which does more damage to your stress meter, turning into Hyde, then returning to Jekyll, where all enemies on screen are despawned. That's really it. This is a real trick that's useful in other parts of the game too, like this singer. The pattern of her notes is surprise, totally random, and basically unavoidable. There is, however, a way to shut her up. If you have 8 coins, you can walk up to her, pay her, and she'll stop. This is the only use of coins, by the way. There's no shop, no items. It's just a thing you need to get past this enemy. You get coins from defeating enemies as Hyde, and in the Japanese version, some of the levels have this lady waving at Jekyll from her window. Going into her house will refill all of your life and meter, along with giving you a bunch of money. Unless she takes all of your money and turns you into Hyde. That can happen too. That lady is not on any of the stages with the singer, so even if you get lucky, if you game over, you can continue from the last level you were on, but all of your coins are gone. This means that if you get to the levels with the singer with no coins, you need to either grind them as Hyde or get to her as Jekyll, transform, and transform back to despawn her. And you want to know the craziest part? I think they knew. If you touch her without enough coins, you instantly lose all of your meter. I think they knew how stupid it was to make this arbitrary wall in the level, and they gave you a way to exploit the game's behavior, instead of just fixing the problem. Okay, a few more things I wanted to mention. These spiders suck. They're one of the most obnoxious instances of this game's random patterns. They don't climb up or down at any set speed or height, and when the level decides that this is gonna be the one with 2 in a row, it just becomes a series of painful crapshoots, which could describe all of Jekyll's gameplay, come to think of it. You can go into these doors as Jekyll to Hyde, but you can't choose when you leave? This is pretty useless once you know how to avoid the bombs. The only other time you might want to use them is to avoid the barrels, but those spawn so quickly you're better off just waiting and jumping. The startup on your jump is already slow enough. The only use for the cane seems to be killing the bees, but that can also be done by just...
What? What? Did I... What the... Whoa. Oh, no. What the fuck?
Both characters share a health bar, so when you die as Jekyll, you go through the whole transformation sequence, then Hyde dies, then you game over? Why not just go straight to a game over? You're not gonna believe it, but this game has multiple endings. The regular ending is done by getting Jekyll to the church where he can marry his fiancée. The good ending is achieved in a pretty strange way. So Jekyll and Hyde play the same stages, just different versions, right? Well, Hyde's stage 6 is different from Jekyll's. Jekyll takes the street to the church, but Hyde gets a short section before he leaps to the rooftops. This is technically a different level, meaning that the lightning won't strike you. From here, you traverse to the end where you fight a final boss. Yeah, a final boss. The level itself sucks, but I'd take it over Jekyll's random nonsense any day. Each character's progression is consistent, so in order to get to this point, you need to do a balancing act where you advance Jekyll a stage, then Hyde, and so on, until Jekyll gets to 6 first. At that point, you should be somewhat used to the awkward controls and terrible attack. It doesn't help that the automatic jumping will often send you flying up into enemies, but God, anything is better than the barrels. The final boss is just a recolored enemy from earlier. It even uses the same attack. Most of the footage I'm using is from my stream, but that crashed like 2 minutes before I beat the game. Rest assured, I did win, and when that happens, you're placed back where you were as Jekyll, but it's quiet. You walk through the town, the music is playing, but there's no people, no animals, none of the chaos from before. It reminds me, of all things, the ladder sequence from Metal Gear Solid 3? Just a slow, contemplative hike to the end. When Jekyll arrives at the church, he joins Millicent and they walk the aisle together, only to be interrupted by what I think is supposed to be Mr. Hyde? What kind of good ending is that? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a case of throwing everything at the wall and having nothing stick. None of the game's mechanics are communicated in any way to the player. The Jekyll sections offer them no agency, and the overwhelming amount of random elements is just lazy and makes improving a Herculean effort. Hyde's gameplay is just baffling combat, with attacks that are useless or difficult to use. Levels are almost completely flat, with no care for enemy placement. Overall, it's just a thoughtless, tedious experience. If it were a cut of meat, it would just be fat and, like, cartilage. Oh, that's a dumb analogy.